The Grand Assembly Hall hummed with a cacophony of alien languages, translation matrices working overtime to bridge the vast communication gaps between species. Holographic displays flickered with intricate star charts, economic projections, and diplomatic communiques that danced across translucent screens. Michael Rodriguez sat near the back of the chamber, deliberately positioned in the least conspicuous seat available. To the casual observer, he appeared unremarkable. His dark blue diplomatic suit was neither ostentatious nor memorable, carefully tailored to blend into the background of this interstellar gathering. Unlike the ornate, multi-limbed representatives of elder species or the bioluminescent diplomats from crystalline worlds, Rodriguez looked almost disappointingly human. Short-cropped hair, olive skin, eyes that seemed to absorb more information than they revealed. The Cosmic Assembly represented millennia of interstellar diplomacy. Delegates from over 200 known species filled the circular chamber, each occupying carefully designated zones that reflected centuries of political maneuvering. Floating translation orbs hovered near each delegation, converting complex linguistic patterns into comprehensible communication. Gravity generators maintained different atmospheric conditions for various species, creating a complex environmental mosaic that spoke to the intricate nature of galactic cooperation. Rodriguez's delegation occupied what was colloquially known as the junior section, a diplomatic euphemism that meant humanity was considered a newcomer, barely worthy of serious consideration. The human representatives were positioned closest to the environmental control systems, a not-so-subtle indication of their perceived importance in the grand scheme of galactic politics. But appearances could be deceptive. Beneath Rodriguez's seemingly disinterested exterior, a complex network of quantum-encrypted communication systems tracked every single interaction in the chamber. Microscopic neural interfaces, seamlessly integrated into his nervous system, processed vast amounts of data in milliseconds. Each subtle gesture, each diplomatic nuance was being analyzed by the most advanced intelligence network humanity had ever developed. The current session focused on resource allocation in the outer spiral arm of the Milky Way. Representatives from the Zorn Collective, a multi-bodied species of crystalline intelligence, were presenting their standard argument about expanding their mining operations. Their holographic representation shifted and morphed, multiple crystalline appendages gesturing with mathematical precision as they outlined their territorial claims. Rodriguez watched and waited. His neural interface began compiling a comprehensive analysis. Trade routes, historical precedents, subtle economic manipulations. Each piece of information was cross-referenced and analyzed faster than any organic brain could process. The Zorn believed they were presenting a routine diplomatic request. They had no idea they were walking into a meticulously prepared trap. Around him, other delegates continued their performances. The methane-breathing Krell representatives maintained their traditional posture of rigid superiority. Holographic avatars of species unable to physically attend flickered with varying degrees of technological sophistication. Some were barely distinguishable from basic light projections, while others appeared almost indistinguishable from living beings. A junior diplomatic aide from the human delegation approached Rodriguez, carefully maintaining a respectful distance. "Sir," she whispered, her communication encrypted by multiple layers of quantum security, "the preliminary data analysis is complete. Everything is in place." Rodriguez gave the slightest nod. To anyone watching, it would appear to be nothing more than a momentary adjustment of posture. But to his team, it was a green light. The culmination of years of preparation was about to unfold. The current speaker from the Zorn Collective finished their presentation. A momentary silence filled the chamber, the traditional pause where other delegations could request clarification or challenge the presented information. Michael Rodriguez slowly straightened in his seat. His movement was deliberate, calculated. For the first time, a few delegates began to notice the human representative. Something in his posture suggested a change was coming. The invisible threat was about to become very visible. In this moment, suspended between diplomatic tradition and an impending revelation, the entire galactic political landscape held its breath. Humanity was about to demonstrate that being underestimated was not the same as being insignificant. The chamber fell silent as Michael Rodriguez approached the central presentation platform. His movements were deliberate, each step calculated with the precision of a military strategist rather than a traditional diplomat. Holographic interfaces flickered to life around him, responding to imperceptible neural commands that suggested years of preparation. Distinguished representatives of the Cosmic Assembly, Rodriguez began, his voice modulated to carry perfectly through the chamber's advanced acoustics. I come before you today not with a standard diplomatic report, but with a comprehensive expose of systematic oppression that has gone unchallenged for generations. The first holographic projection materialized, a complex three-dimensional map of human colonial territories. What initially appeared to be a standard star chart quickly transformed. Lines of economic data began to weave between star systems, revealing an intricate network of financial manipulations that had remained hidden for decades. Zorn delegates shifted uncomfortably. The Krell representatives exchanged barely perceptible glances. Rodriguez continued, his presentation gaining momentum with each revealed detail. Consider the Proxima cluster colonization efforts, he said, zooming into a specific region of space. What has been presented as fair resource allocation is, in fact, a carefully constructed system of economic subjugation. Detailed financial records began to populate the holographic display. Trading routes, resource extraction permissions, interstellar transportation fees. Each line of data told a story of calculated marginalization. Rodriguez demonstrated how seemingly minor regulatory decisions had systematically restricted human colonial development. A representative from the Ecological Harmonization Council interrupted, her translucent form flickering with indignation. These are serious accusations, Ambassador Rodriguez. Do you have concrete evidence to support such claims? Rodriguez smiled, a predatory expression that sent an unexpected chill through the assembled delegates. Not just evidence. Comprehensive, irrefutable documentation. With a subtle gesture, he unleashed a flood of information. Financial records, communication logs, diplomatic communiques. Each document materialized with forensic precision. The holographic displays began to reconstruct entire networks of economic manipulation, showing how multiple species had collaborated to limit human expansion. The most damning evidence focused on a series of trade agreements from the past 30 years. Each contract appeared innocuous on the surface, standard interstellar commerce documentation. But Rodriguez's presentation peeled back layers of legal complexity, revealing systematic efforts to restrict human access to critical resources, advanced technologies, and strategic star systems. Let me be explicitly clear, Rodriguez said, his voice cutting through the growing murmur of the assembly. These are not accidental limitations. This is a deliberate, coordinated effort to maintain a hierarchical system that keeps emerging species, specifically humanity, in a perpetual state of economic and technological disadvantage. The Krell representative from the Territorial Expansion Committee attempted to interject. Rodriguez's neural interface anticipated the interruption, instantly projecting additional documentation that preemptively dismantled any potential counter-argument. Star charts transformed into economic flow diagrams. Resource extraction patterns became visible, a complex dance of exploitation that had remained hidden behind layers of bureaucratic complexity. Rodriguez demonstrated how seemingly minor regulatory decisions had created insurmountable barriers for human colonial development. For generations, humanity has been told to be patient, Rodriguez continued, to work within the existing system. What we discovered is that the system itself was designed to prevent our progress. Each projection was a surgical strike of information. Financial records, diplomatic communications, resource allocation reports. Rodriguez dismantled decades of galactic political narrative with cold, mathematical precision. The chamber descended into a state of controlled chaos. Delegates began speaking simultaneously, translation matrices struggling to keep up with the rapid-fire exchanges. Some species looked shocked. Others appeared defensive. A few seemed on the verge of diplomatic panic. Rodriguez stood at the center of the storm, calm and unmoving. This was more than a presentation. This was an intellectual demolition of the existing galactic power structure. "We do not come before you as supplicants," he said, his final words cutting through the noise. "We come as a species demanding our rightful place in the cosmic community." The first phase of his plan was complete. The real confrontation was about to begin. As the diplomatic uproar from Rodriguez's previous revelation began to settle, a new tension filled the assembly chamber. The holographic displays flickered, then transformed with a precision that suggested something far beyond standard technological capabilities. "Distinguished representatives," Rodriguez announced, his voice calm and measured, "allow me to introduce you to humanity's true technological potential." The first demonstration began with what appeared to be a simple quantum communication network projection. But this was no ordinary display. Intricate quantum entanglement patterns danced across the holographic space, revealing communication networks that could predict diplomatic strategies before they were even formulated. A delegation from the Quantum Research Collective leaned forward, their multi-crystalline bodies vibrating with a mixture of scientific curiosity and growing unease. Rodriguez's presentation showed communication protocols that could instantaneously transmit information across impossible distances, with encryption methods that made current galactic security systems look like primitive code-breaking exercises. "What you're witnessing," Rodriguez explained, "is a breakthrough in quantum communication that fundamentally rewrites the rules of interstellar information exchange." The demonstration shifted. Nanoscale technological projections began to materialize, showing adaptive defense systems that could reconfigure themselves faster than any known species could comprehend. Microscopic machines demonstrated the ability to instantaneously respond to environmental changes, repair damage, and create defensive structures with a level of complexity that bordered on biological intelligence. The Zorn representatives' crystalline structures began to fluctuate, a visible sign of their growing anxiety. Their most advanced technological systems were being dismantled in real time, revealed as nothing more than rudimentary constructs compared to human innovation. Rodriguez moved to the next demonstration. A holographic representation of a human deep space exploration vessel appeared, its systems laid bare for all to see. What initially looked like a standard interstellar craft began to reveal layers of technological sophistication that defied conventional understanding. Adaptive hull materials that could instantaneously respond to radiation, micrometeorite impacts, and extreme environmental conditions. Propulsion systems that manipulated quantum tunneling to achieve speeds previously thought impossible. Life support systems that could not just maintain human life, but actively enhance human physiological capabilities in deep space environments. "These are not theoretical concepts," Rodriguez stated matter-of-factly. "These are operational technologies that have been quietly developed over the past decade." The most shocking revelation came with a demonstration of human biotechnological advancements. Holographic displays showed human neural interfaces that could directly interact with complex technological systems, adaptive genetic modifications that could help humans survive in extreme environments, and medical nanotechnology that could repair cellular damage in real time. A representative from the Biological Adaptation Council stammered an interruption. "These levels of technological integration are impossible. They violate multiple interstellar research protocols." Rodriguez's response was a cold smile. Impossible is a word used by those who lack imagination. The technological showcase continued. Artificial intelligence systems that could process complex diplomatic and strategic scenarios faster than entire committee networks. Energy generation technologies that could extract power from quantum vacuum states. Communication systems that could interpret and translate languages in real time, with a level of nuance that made current translation matrices look like crude approximations. Each demonstration was a calculated strike. Rodriguez was not just showing technological capabilities, he was dismantling the fundamental assumptions about human potential that the galactic community had maintained for generations. The final demonstration was perhaps the most chilling. A comprehensive overview of human technological development revealed a pattern of innovation that suggested something far more profound. These were not just isolated technological breakthroughs. This was a systematic, coordinated effort of scientific and technological evolution that had been carefully hidden from the galactic community. "We have been watching," Rodriguez said, his final words hanging in the air like a promise and a threat. "We have been preparing. And now we are ready to take our place in the cosmic community." The assembly chamber fell into a stunned silence. The technological landscape of the galaxy had just been rewritten in the span of a single presentation. Humanity was no longer a footnote in galactic history. They were about to become the primary authors of its next chapter. The moment of technological revelation gave way to something far more profound. Rodriguez was about to launch the most devastating weapon in his arsenal, a comprehensive deconstruction of galactic diplomatic traditions. For millennia, he began, his voice cutting through the lingering technological shock. This assembly has operated under the illusion of neutrality. Today, I will demonstrate how your most sacred diplomatic protocols have been nothing more than an elaborate mechanism of oppression. Holographic displays began to reconstruct the entire history of the cosmic assembly. Each diplomatic decision, each seemingly neutral resolution, was now laid bare, stripped of its traditional veneer of objectivity. Rodriguez used the assembly's own archival systems against them, creating a devastating narrative of systemic manipulation. The first target was the Resource Allocation Committee. Rodriguez methodically demonstrated how its supposedly impartial guidelines had consistently favored established galactic powers. Trade routes, colonial expansion permissions, technological exchange protocols, each was revealed as a carefully constructed barrier designed to maintain existing power structures. "Your neutrality is a myth," Rodriguez declared, "a carefully constructed illusion that preserves the status quo." Historical diplomatic communications began to flood the chamber's displays. Private communications, redacted documents, classified negotiations, all were suddenly, brutally exposed. The most powerful delegates watched in horror as decades of behind-the-scenes manipulations were brought into stark, unforgiving light. The Ecological Harmonization Council found itself particularly vulnerable. Rodriguez revealed a series of environmental protection protocols that had effectively prevented emerging species from developing resource-rich planetary systems. What had been presented as environmental preservation was, in fact, a sophisticated economic blockade. Diplomatic representatives began to react. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others attempted to interrupt. But Rodriguez's neural interface anticipated and blocked each potential intervention. The presentation continued its relentless march, dismantling institutional myths with surgical precision. "Let me be explicitly clear," Rodriguez said, his tone moving from analytical to something approaching righteous fury. "Your diplomatic traditions are not a system of fairness. They are a mechanism of control." He began to demonstrate how seemingly minor diplomatic decisions had created generational barriers for developing species. Translation protocols that subtly misrepresented communication, economic guidelines that disguised systemic discrimination, research sharing agreements that were nothing more than sophisticated theft prevention mechanisms. The Territorial Expansion Committee found itself particularly exposed. Rodriguez revealed a complex network of bureaucratic mechanisms that had systematically prevented human colonial development. What had been presented as careful, measured expansion was revealed as a deliberate strategy of containment. Most devastating was the exposure of the Diplomatic Mediation Protocol, a set of guidelines that had been considered the most sacred of galactic diplomatic traditions. Rodriguez demonstrated how this protocol was, in essence, a sophisticated tool for maintaining existing power structures. "You have created a system," Rodriguez said, "that speaks of equality while ensuring inequality. A diplomatic framework that talks of opportunity while preventing progress." The psychological assault was calculated and complete. Rodriguez was not just presenting information. He was systematically destroying the fundamental narrative that the Cosmic Assembly had maintained for generations. Delegates from various species began to react. The Zorn Collective's crystalline structures began to fracture slightly, a visible manifestation of their growing psychological distress. The Krell representatives attempted to maintain their traditional posture of superiority, but cracks were beginning to show. "We are not asking for inclusion," Rodriguez continued. "We are demanding a complete restructuring of these institutional frameworks." Each revelation was a precise strike. Diplomatic communication logs, historical negotiation records, institutional decision-making processes, all were brought into the harsh light of scrutiny. The carefully maintained facade of galactic diplomacy was crumbling in real time. The final blow was a comprehensive analysis of how these diplomatic traditions had actively prevented technological and cultural exchange. What had been presented as careful, measured approach was revealed as a sophisticated mechanism of control. As the presentation concluded, the assembly chamber was no longer just a diplomatic space. It had become a crime scene, with the evidence of systemic oppression laid bare for all to see. Rodriguez stood at the center of the storm, calm and unmoving. The psychological warfare was complete. The galactic political landscape would never be the same again. Panic spread through the cosmic assembly like a quantum contagion. The carefully maintained diplomatic composure began to fracture, revealing the raw, primal reactions of species suddenly confronted with their own systemic failures. The Zorn Collective's representative, a being of intricate crystalline complexity, rose first. Its multifaceted form trembled with a mixture of rage and barely contained fear. "These accusations are preposterous." The translation matrix struggled to capture the full emotional complexity of the outburst. Rodriguez remained perfectly still. Each movement, or lack thereof, was calculated. His neural interface continued to analyze the chamber's reactions, processing diplomatic responses faster than any organic mind could comprehend. Diplomatic channels began to splinter. Private communication networks lit up with encrypted transmissions. Some species sought immediate military consultation. Others began emergency diplomatic sessions, attempting to mitigate the potential fallout of Rodriguez's revelations. The Krell Territorial Expansion Committee launched the first official counter-response. A massive holographic projection materialized, presenting what they claimed was a comprehensive refutation of Rodriguez's claims. But those familiar with advanced information analysis could see the hastily constructed narrative, its logical inconsistencies almost painful in their obviousness. "Your so-called evidence is nothing more than selective interpretation," bellowed the Krell representative, his volumetric projection expanding to intimidate. Rodriguez allowed a slight smile. The response was precisely what he had anticipated. Smaller delegations, those from emerging or marginalized species, began to react differently. Quiet communication started to flow between previously disconnected groups. Rodriguez's presentation had done more than expose systemic issues. It had created unexpected diplomatic connections. A representative from a cluster of independent mining colonies approached the human delegation. Her communication was encrypted, but Rodriguez's neural interface decoded it instantly. "We've been waiting for someone to break this system," she transmitted. "But are you truly prepared for the consequences?" The chamber continued its descent into controlled chaos. Diplomatic protocols, those carefully constructed mechanisms of interstellar communication, began to break down. Species that had maintained centuries of careful neutrality now found themselves forced to choose sides. Rodriguez's team maintained perfect composure. Each member was connected through an advanced quantum communication network, analyzing potential diplomatic and strategic responses with superhuman precision. They were not just observers. They were architects of a fundamental transformation. The Ecological Harmonization Council attempted to launch an official investigation into the human delegation's claims, but their own archival systems had been subtly compromised during Rodriguez's initial presentation. Every attempt to construct a counter-narrative found itself undermined by its own historical documentation. Military advisors from various species began to appear through holographic projections. Defensive strategies were being rapidly recalculated. The possibility of conflict, Something that had seemed impossible mere hours ago now became a potential reality. "We demand immediate clarification," shouted a representative from the Galactic Trade Consortium. "These accusations cannot be allowed to stand without comprehensive review." Rodriguez stepped forward. "Review is precisely what we are demanding," he responded. His voice carried a calm that was more terrifying than any show of aggression. Comprehensive, transparent, and unfiltered review. The quantum communication networks surrounding the human delegation began to pulse with an almost living energy. Defensive systems activated, not as a threat, but as a clear demonstration of preparedness. Each system was a marvel of technological sophistication that made traditional defensive mechanisms look like primitive constructs. Smaller species, those long marginalized by the existing galactic power structures, began to show increased interest. Diplomatic channels that had been dormant for generations suddenly became active. Rodriguez's presentation had done more than expose systemic issues. It had provided a blueprint for potential resistance. The Cosmic Assembly was no longer a diplomatic forum. It had become a battlefield of information, with humanity holding a technological and strategic advantage that defied conventional understanding. Rodriguez stood at the center of the growing storm. Each moment was calculated. Each potential response had been anticipated and prepared for. The real confrontation was just beginning. The dominoes were falling, and humanity was controlling the cascade. The chaos of the assembly hall began to crystallize into something more purposeful. As the initial shock of Rodriguez's revelations subsided, a remarkable transformation started to take shape. Marginalized species, those long forgotten in the shadows of galactic politics, began to emerge with newfound hope. A delegation from the Coral Nebula colonies approached the human representatives. Their representative, a being of liquid crystalline composition, transmitted a communication that bypassed traditional diplomatic channels. "We have waited generations for someone to challenge the existing order." The transmission read, its emotional undertones barely contained by the translation matrix. Rodriguez recognized the strategic opportunity. His neural interface was already analyzing potential diplomatic alignments, tracking the subtle shifts of power that were beginning to occur. The human delegation was not just responding to the current situation, they were actively shaping it. The mining colonies that had previously existed on the fringes of galactic economic systems began to communicate. These were species that had been systematically prevented from accessing critical resources, their technological development deliberately stunted by the existing power structures. Rodriguez's presentation had given them something they had never possessed before, a comprehensive language of resistance. "Our historical records," transmitted a representative from the Crystalline Asteroid Confederacy, "confirm every aspect of the human delegation's claims." One by one, smaller species began to share their own stories of systematic oppression. Holographic displays began to fill with corroborating evidence, decades of suppressed historical documentation, economic manipulation records, and technological development restrictions. The Ecological Harmonization Council found itself increasingly isolated. Their attempts to maintain their traditional diplomatic posture were being dismantled in real time. Species that had once been considered too insignificant to matter were now presenting comprehensive evidence of systemic discrimination. Rodriguez moved with calculated precision. Each interaction was an opportunity, each communication a potential strategic alliance. The human delegation was not just presenting information, they were actively rebuilding the diplomatic landscape. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The Deep Space Exploration Consortium, a collective of scientific research species, began to validate the technological claims presented earlier. Their own research archives revealed a pattern of deliberate technological suppression that aligned perfectly with Rodriguez's initial presentation. "We have documented evidence," their lead researcher transmitted, "of systematic restrictions on interstellar research capabilities." The diplomatic landscape was transforming. What had begun as a human presentation was rapidly becoming a galactic movement. Species that had been isolated began to find common ground. sharing information through newly established communication networks that bypassed traditional diplomatic channels. The Krell Territorial Expansion Committee attempted to maintain its traditional approach of intimidation, but their holographic projections now seemed less impressive, their diplomatic language exposed as a complex system of manipulation. Rodriguez's team continued to analyze and respond. Their quantum communication networks allowed for instantaneous strategic assessment. Each new alliance was carefully evaluated, each potential diplomatic connection meticulously examined. The most surprising development came from the scientific community. Research institutions that had been previously isolated began to share comprehensive documentation. Technological development records, suppressed research findings, systematic limitations on scientific exploration, all became part of a growing body of evidence. "We are not asking for revolution," Rodriguez announced to the increasingly fragmented assembly. "We are demanding evolution." The human delegation's approach was masterful. They were not presenting themselves as conquerors or revolutionaries. They were offering a new framework of galactic cooperation, one based on genuine transparency and mutual development. Smaller research collectives began to align. Species that had been prevented from full scientific exchange now found themselves with unprecedented access to information. The existing power structures were being dismantled not through violence, but through the most powerful weapon in existence: unrestricted knowledge. The Cosmic Assembly was no longer a monolithic institution. It was becoming a dynamic, living system of potential collaboration. Rodriguez stood at the center of this transformation, each moment carefully calculated, each interaction a strategic move in a complex diplomatic chess game. Unexpected allies continued to emerge, and with each new alliance, the old galactic order trembled. The transformation of the Cosmic Assembly reached a critical moment. Traditional power structures began to crumble like ancient stone monuments, weathered by an unstoppable tide of change. Rodriguez emerged from being a mere diplomat to a revolutionary figure who was fundamentally challenging millennia of established galactic order. Every word became a strategic weapon. Every piece of presented evidence a precisely targeted strike against the existing system. The chamber, once a bastion of controlled diplomatic interactions, now pulsed with an electric tension of impending transformation. The Zorn Collective's representatives found themselves in an unprecedented position of vulnerability. Their crystalline structures seemed to fracture metaphorically with each new revelation. Diplomatic communications that had been carefully maintained for centuries began to collapse under the weight of comprehensive evidence. "We are presenting more than accusations," Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying a calm that was more terrifying than any show of aggression. "We are providing a comprehensive blueprint for genuine galactic cooperation." Holographic displays began to showcase alternative governance models. These were not theoretical constructs, but meticulously researched proposals that demonstrated how interstellar cooperation could function without systemic oppression. Each projection dismantled existing power structures while simultaneously offering constructive alternatives. The scientific research networks that had begun to align during the previous stages now became a formidable force. Species that had been isolated for generations suddenly found themselves sharing decades of suppressed research. Technological innovations that had been deliberately restricted now flooded the communication networks. A representative from the Deep Space Exploration Collective transmitted a comprehensive report. Their findings corroborated humanity's claims with a level of scientific precision that left no room for diplomatic maneuvering. Technological development restrictions, research suppression, systematic economic limitations, all were laid bare with mathematical clarity. Rodriguez's team maintained an almost supernatural level of preparation. Their quantum communication networks processed diplomatic responses faster than any organic intelligence could comprehend. Each potential counter-argument was anticipated, each diplomatic maneuver already mapped out. The Ecological Harmonization Council attempted to mount a defense, but their own archival systems had been systematically compromised during the initial presentation. Every attempt to construct a counter-narrative found itself undermined by its own historical documentation. "The system is not broken," Rodriguez declared. "The system was designed to prevent genuine progress." Smaller species that had existed on the margins of galactic society began to find their voice. Mining colonies, research collectives, independent exploration groups, they presented comprehensive documentation of systematic oppression. What had once been isolated complaints now became a unified narrative of resistance. The military advisors from various species watched with growing concern. Traditional defensive strategies were being rapidly recalculated. The possibility of conflict, something that had seemed impossible mere hours ago, now became a potential reality. Rodriguez transformed diplomatic language itself. Each statement was a precision instrument, dismantling centuries of carefully constructed bureaucratic obfuscation. He spoke not with aggression, but with a calm rationality that was far more devastating. The quantum communication networks surrounding the human delegation pulsed with an almost living energy. Defensive systems activated, not as a threat, but as a clear demonstration of preparedness. Each system was a marvel of technological sophistication that made traditional mechanisms look like primitive constructs. The Krell Territorial Expansion Committee found itself increasingly isolated. Their attempts to maintain traditional diplomatic posturing became less and less effective. The carefully constructed facade of galactic governance was crumbling in real time. "We are not asking for permission," Rodriguez stated. "We are demanding a fundamental restructuring of how intelligent species interact." The final moments of the Cosmic Assembly's transformation unfolded with a precision that bordered on the miraculous. Rodriguez presented a comprehensive plan for galactic governance, so meticulously crafted that it became impossible to ignore. The document was not a mere proposal, it was a complete blueprint for restructuring interstellar cooperation. "We are not seeking dominance," Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying through the chamber with crystal clarity. "We are proposing a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent species can coexist and collaborate." The proposed governance model dismantled centuries of hierarchical structures. It introduced a dynamic system of representation that gave voice to species previously marginalized. Resource allocation, technological exchange, scientific research, every fundamental aspect of galactic interaction was being comprehensively reimagined. The Ecological Harmonization Council found itself at a critical juncture. Their traditional role as gatekeepers of interspecies cooperation was being systematically dismantled. Rodriguez's proposal offered a more transparent, more equitable approach to environmental and resource management. Holographic displays began to showcase the intricate details of the new governance model. It was not a simple replacement of existing systems, but a complete reconstruction that addressed fundamental issues of representation, resource distribution, and technological exchange. Species that had been confined to the margins of galactic society suddenly found themselves with genuine pathways to development. Research networks could now share information without bureaucratic restrictions. Mining colonies gained access to technological resources that had been deliberately withheld for generations. The most revolutionary aspect was the proposal's adaptive governance structure. Instead of a fixed system, the new framework allowed for continuous refinement based on collective input. It was a living, breathing approach to interstellar cooperation that could evolve with the collective needs of participating species. Rodriguez's team had prepared for every potential counter-argument. Their quantum communication networks had analyzed countless potential scenarios, ensuring that the proposal was robust enough to withstand intense diplomatic scrutiny. The Zorn Collective's representatives, beings of complex crystalline intelligence, found themselves genuinely impressed. The proposal addressed fundamental concerns that had plagued interstellar cooperation for millennia. It was not a human-centric model, but a truly collaborative approach to galactic governance. "We are presenting a system," Rodriguez explained, "that recognizes the unique potential of every species, not through limitation, but through genuine opportunity." The most shocking element was the transparency mechanism. Every aspect of the proposed governance would be subject to comprehensive, real-time documentation. No more hidden communications, no more systematic oppression through bureaucratic complexity. It was happening. Right now. And nothing would ever be the same again. Scientific research networks that had begun to align during previous stages now became crucial supporters. The proposal included comprehensive frameworks for technological exchange, scientific collaboration, and collective problem-solving that had never before been considered possible. The military advisors from various species watched with a mixture of concern and fascination. The proposed system effectively rendered traditional military strategies obsolete. Conflict resolution mechanisms were built into the very fabric of the governance model. Smaller species that had existed on the margins of galactic society found themselves with unprecedented opportunities. Mining colonies, research collectives, independent exploration groups. They would now have genuine representation and access to resources. The Krell Territorial Expansion Committee, once a dominant force in galactic politics, found its traditional approach completely invalidated. The new model proposed collaborative exploration and resource management that made their previous strategies look archaic. Rodriguez's final presentation was a masterpiece of diplomatic engineering. Each word, each proposal was a precision instrument designed to dismantle existing power structures while simultaneously offering a path forward. "This is not a revolution," he stated. "This is an evolution." The Cosmic Assembly was no longer a forum for maintaining existing power structures. It had become a crucible of genuine transformation. Humanity had done more than challenge the existing system. They had provided a comprehensive alternative. As the final details of the proposal were presented, a profound silence fell over the chamber. Species that had been enemies for generations found themselves looking at a potential future of genuine cooperation. The existing galactic order was not just being challenged. It was being comprehensively reimagined. Rodriguez stood at the center of this transformation. Each moment of the presentation had been calculated. Each potential response anticipated. The revolutionary proposal was not just a possibility.